What if every choice you've ever made wasn't a choice at all? You think you're deciding what to eat, whom to love, when to leave, but beneath the illusion of control is a quiet machinery, one that ticks long before you're aware, one that knows before you know. You are the puppet, but the strings are neurons, the stage is space-time, and the script was written long ago. This isn't about destiny, it's about the disturbing precision of your biology, the predictable loops of your psychology, the paradoxes of time, causality, and consciousness that trap you in a world where free will isn't just questioned, it's dismantled. Tonight we will descend through 30 doorways, each a theory, each a trap, and by the time you reach the end, you may not know who or what is doing the listening. You lift your hand. It feels like your decision, a clean impulse, a simple movement. You wanted to raise it, and so you did. Free will, exercised, or so it seems. But what if the decision was made before you were even aware you had one? In the 1980s, neuroscientist Benjamin Libet conducted an experiment that cracked open this very moment, the moment of choosing. Participants were told to flex their wrist whenever they felt like it. Nothing complicated, but here's the catch. They were also told to watch a rotating clock and note the exact time when they became consciously aware of the intention to move. Libet wasn't just recording motion, he was recording time, neural time. And what he discovered broke the spine of freedom. Using EEG scans, Libet found that a readiness potential, a buildup of electrical activity in the brain, appeared nearly 500 milliseconds before the person reported making a conscious decision. The body had already begun preparing to move, the choice had already been set in motion, before the self showed up to claim credit. In that half-second gap, something terrifying revealed itself, the possibility that you are not the author of your actions, but merely the narrator of them, a mind watching a play it did not write, stepping in only to justify, explain, and polish the illusion of control. This half-second is where free will begins to tremble. Now pause, think of your last decision. Was it to stop scrolling, to breathe deeper, to keep watching this video? When did that decision begin? Was it you, or the readiness potential, already active in the shadows? Libet didn't conclude that free will was dead. Instead, he introduced a concept called free won't, the ability to veto a decision before it's carried out. According to him, you might not originate the action, but you can stop it. Yet even that idea is fragile. Later studies suggest that even vetoes might arise from the same unconscious sources. You don't choose to cancel. The cancellation is chosen. And so we fall into a recursive loop. You decide, but the decision was forming before you. You act, but the impulse arrived uninvited. You claim it, but the brain was already moving. You are free until time proves otherwise. Think of the clock again, the one from Libet's lab. The second hand spins, smooth and certain, but behind it, an invisible mechanism turns without your consent. You're not watching the clock is watching you, and long before you say now, the signal was already sent. The moment was already chosen. You are the witness, the afterthought, the echo of something older than you. In this gap, this 500 millisecond chasm, free will doesn't vanish. It fades, quietly, like a shadow that slips behind your thoughts before you ever knew it was there. And as we move to the next door, ask yourself, if you are not the one who begins your choices, are you the one choosing it all? You walk into a room with two doors, one on the left, one on the right. You pause, think, choose the right door. But what if, behind the scenes, someone had already set up a mechanism to ensure that if you had tried to choose the left, they would have intervened to stop you, and you never even knew? Welcome to the world of Frankfurt cases, thought experiments that dismantle the notion that alternative possibilities are required for free will. In 1969, philosopher Harry Frankfurt proposed a controversial challenge to centuries of philosophical consensus. Traditionally, thinkers like Descartes and Locke believed that for an act to be free, the agent must have been able to do otherwise. That is, if you couldn't have chosen differently, you weren't really free. But Frankfurt had another idea. Imagine a scenario. You decide to vote for candidate A. No coercion, no pressure. It feels voluntary. Unknown to you, however, a powerful neuroscientist has implanted a device in your brain. If you had started to lean toward candidate B, the device would have activated and forced you to vote for A anyway. But since you chose A on your own, the device never triggered. Did you act freely? According to Frankfurt, yes. You weren't forced, your choice aligned with your own motivations, and crucially, the device never even activated. But here's the twist. You couldn't have done otherwise. The moment you might have strayed, control would have snapped into place. The illusion of freedom was preserved, but the possibility of real choice was an illusion. This logic strikes a knife into the heart of classical free will, because if the freedom to choose differently isn't necessary for moral responsibility, as Frankfurt argued, then even in a fully deterministic world, you can still be held accountable. You're free, not because you could have chosen otherwise, but because your internal mechanisms did what they would do anyway without interference. But here sets the haunting echo. What if your entire life is built like this? What if the paths you didn't take, the jobs you didn't apply for, the people you didn't love, the rebellions you never enacted, were simply doors rigged to close the moment you turned toward them? You didn't notice because the interference was silent. You didn't resist because the design never let you feel the friction. You chose what you would have chosen anyway, because the world was engineered to make it look that way. The danger of Frankfurt's logic is subtle. It lets determinism swallow responsibility while still calling it freedom. You are not free from causality, you are free within it. You are the rail car praising its own navigation, on tracks laid down long before your birth. In this space, the notion of choice becomes performance. The curtain rises, the lights dim, the actor steps forward and says the lines perfectly, passionately, unaware that every word was already printed in the script. So ask yourself, if your path was locked, but the locks were invisible, if your decisions were yours but no real alternatives existed, would it feel any different? Or is that illusion, that whisper of agency, enough to make you believe you were never bound? Take a breath. Now ask yourself, why did you take that breath? Was it to relax? To focus? Out of habit? Whatever your reason, let's go deeper. Why that reason? Why did your mind choose that explanation, in that moment, at that speed, with those words? Now follow that cause, and the cause behind that cause, and the one behind that. Where does it end? It doesn't, Stet. This is the determinism loop, the idea that every decision, every thought, every impulse, is the consequence of a prior state, and that state came from another, which came from another, in an unbroken chain of cause and effect, stretching backward to the beginning of time. You are not a spark. You are a sequence. The illusion of choice feels real only because we're trapped in the middle of this chain, never quite seeing the origin. Your decision to click this video, shaped by your curiosity, but your curiosity, formed by your personality, which was sculpted by your experiences, which were determined by your upbringing, which were set in motion by your parents, their choices, their DNA, their geography, their childhood trauma, their ancestral famine, their inherited beliefs, their nation's wars, their species' evolution, their planet's physics. Each layer, a cause, each you, just another link. Now imagine this as a loop, because it doesn't move in a straight line. The very beliefs you hold about free will influence your future behavior. If you think you're not free, you act differently, and that altered behavior loops back into your next belief, your next identity, your next choice. The loop feeds itself. A snake biting its own tail, elegantly, endlessly. And here's the trap. Even the feeling of breaking free is part of the loop. When someone says, "But I chose to resist my programming," that resistance was still caused by something, perhaps a book they read, a conversation they had, a chemical imbalance in their brain, a defiant reaction to authority, which was itself shaped by earlier authority. There's steps no outside the loop. And this isn't just philosophy, it's physics. In classical mechanics, every particle follows predictable laws. If you had a godlike calculator and perfect information about the present state of the universe, you could predict every future state. This is Laplace's demon, the hypothetical intellect that knows all positions, all velocities, all forces. For this demon, the future is as fixed as the past. And if you're made of particles, atoms that obey these same laws, then your choices are calculable too. They feel spontaneous only because you lack the data. So what is free will in this universe? It is the name we give to our inability to trace the loop. We feel free because we can't see the dominoes falling in slow motion behind us. We call it will because the motion was quiet, gentle, camouflaged as personality. But the loop doesn't stop for belief. It doesn't pause for introspection. It continues, always, turning the gears of the brain in predictable probabilistic rhythms. So here you are, thinking you stir thinking. But what if this very thought was not yours, but the necessary result of millions of smaller ones? What if you're not steering, just experiencing the illusion of steering inside a loop too complex to map? The loop doesn't set imprison you. It is you. And freedom, real freedom, would require stepping outside of cause and effect itself. But how can you step outside, if even that impulse to escape was caused? Before you know what you're about to do, your brain already knows. This isn't metaphor. This isn't philosophy. This is the cold, clinical measurement of neurons firing before you feel anything at all. In 2008, neuroscientist John Dylan Haynes led a study that pushed the Libet experiment even further. Participants were placed inside an fMRI machine and told to press one of two buttons, left or right, whenever they felt like it. While they stared at a stream of letters on a screen, they were asked to remember the letter they saw the moment they decided which button to press. But this time, Haynes wasn't just measuring muscle preparation, he was scanning the deep interior of the brain, the prefrontal cortex and parietal regions, to find patterns of prediction. And what they found was startling. Up to 7 seconds before the participant reported consciously making a decision, the researchers could predict, with about 60% accuracy, which button they would press. The brain had already begun laying the groundwork, the choice had already taken shape. Consciousness simply arrived late to the party. Think about that. You think you're in control? But inside your head, before you even feel like deciding, networks of neurons are already whispering, coordinating, preparing. Your awareness is not the origin, it is the narrator, and it's reading a script, already drafted in electricity and silence. What does this mean? It means the you that thinks it's in charge. The conscious self is more like a news anchor reporting decisions made behind the scenes. You're not driving the car, you're sitting in the passenger seat, holding a fake steering wheel, while the real engine hums beneath layers of synaptic wiring and unconscious pattern recognition. And this isn't a glitch. It's how the system evolved. From an evolutionary perspective, consciousness may have developed after action, not to initiate behavior, but to explain it to others, to build social coherence, to justify instincts. The self in this model is not a decision maker, but a press secretary, always explaining, never deciding. But it gets stranger. In some versions of these experiments, not only can computers predict your choices before you're aware, they can also predict when you'll change your mind. The shift in neural patterns precedes even your internal sense of doubt. You are reacting to something after it's already begun. And the implications are vast. In a world where marketing algorithms, political campaigns, and social media feeds are trained to hijack your neural triggers, how much of you remains untouched? How many of your decisions are simply predictable reactions, pre-written lines, waiting to be spoken? You may think, but I still feel like I chose. Isn't that enough? That feeling, the sensation of freedom, might itself be just another post hoc construction, like déjà vu, or the illusion of motion in a static image. The feeling of free will is not proof of its existence. It may simply be the final sparkle atop a chain reaction that began before you were even aware. So next time you hesitate, next time you feel a decision rising, remember this: the brain has already moved. The choice is already echoing in your neurons. The impulse is not arriving, it's revealing. And your awareness is just catching up. Imagine watching your thoughts happen in reverse. The cause follows the effect. The consequence precedes the intention. You feel the decision, and then the desire. You act, and only afterward justify it with logic that never existed at the time. It sounds impossible, but in neuroscience, this is closer to reality than you'd like to admit. The human mind isn't a linear machine. It doesn't operate on strict timelines like a computer program executing commands in order. Instead, it's more like a magician's act, hiding seams, reordering cause and effect, stitching together a coherent story after the pieces are already in motion. This is the secret of the time-reversed mind, a psychological paradox where your awareness lags behind your actions and the story you tell yourself about free will is written after the ink has already dried. In the early 2000s, researchers studying postdictive perception found that the brain doesn't just interpret stimuli as they arrive. It waits, sometimes as long as 500 milliseconds, gathering additional information, and then reconstructs what it thinks must have happened. The sensation of decision, of reality, of volition, is not live, it's post-edited. Let's break that. Imagine you touch a hot stove. Your hand jerks away before you even register the burn. A full quarter second later, your conscious mind feels the pain, but your body had already begun reacting. Then your mind steps in and says, "I pulled my hand back because it hurt." But the cause-effect arrow is wrong. Your body moved first, your brain felt second, and your narrative arrived last, pretending it had been in control all along. This isn't just about reflexes. Even in complex decision-making, the same effect is observed. The sensation of choosing often follows the unconscious buildup of intention. You experience the decision after it has already begun, but your mind reverses the timeline, sewing it back together so it feels smooth, logical, and voluntary. This delay between action and awareness is often masked by the illusion of continuity. Your consciousness doesn't admit it's late to the scene, it pretends it was always there. It rewrites history to protect its story. And the story is always the same. You are in control. But what if that's the greatest trick your brain plays? Even in simple visual tasks, like determining when a dot appears or whether two flashes occurred at once, your brain delays final perception so it can fill in the gaps. It edits. It retroactively inserts experience. Time bends, cause reshuffles, and the illusion of agency holds. Now apply that to your life. What if every decision you believe you made is actually a justification for something already in motion? What if your desires are rationalizations for neural patterns that fired before you could stop them? What if the past in your head is just a polished artifact of your present need for coherence? You are not the author of your actions. You are the editor of the past. This is why free will feels so real. It's a post-production effect. Not a command center, but a narrator scrambling to assemble a story that makes sense. But the story is stitched backward. The mind is always too late. And the self is always catching up. You are the echo of your own thoughts, claiming to be the voice. You are a donkey. Not metaphorically, literally, starving, thirsty, standing equidistant between two identical piles of hay. Both are equally appealing. Neither is closer. There is no difference. No preference, no push. So, which do you choose? According to medieval philosopher Jean Buridan, you don't, you die of indecision. This thought experiment, now known as Buridan sips donkey, sounds absurd at first, a beast paralyzed by symmetry. But it sips not about donkeys, it sips about you, it sips about choice, in the absence of bias, and it reveals a terrifying truth about free will. If all conditions are identical, if there is no reason to prefer one option over another, then choice becomes impossible, unless some hidden factor intervenes. But if such a factor does intervene, then the choice wasn't free, it was tipped by causes beyond your control. This is the paradox. If choice requires reasons, then you are bound by them. If choice occurs without reasons, then it is random, and randomness is not freedom. So where does that leave you? Let's apply this to real life. Say you're choosing between two job offers, same pay, same distance, same future prospects. You agonize over the decision, searching for something to break the tie. Eventually, maybe you flip a coin, or follow a gut feeling. But that gut feeling, it wasn't magic. It was a subtle neural nudge, a trace of past experience, a minor memory, a hidden pattern. Not you deciding, but your past pushing. Even when you feel uncertain, you are not neutral. You are a storm of variables, memories, biases, hormones, and hunger, disguised as intuition. Buridan's donkey, unlike you, had no internal tiebreakers, no memories, no emotions. It was a blank slate, and that blankness is the only true freedom, but also the only true paralysis. The donkey's failure to choose reveals that free will in its purest form may be impossible, because the conditions for it require absolute neutrality, which is also the condition for non-action. In other words, The more free your choice is, the less likely you are to make one. The more likely you are to act, the more constrained that action becomes. So every decision you make is either determined by reasons, meaning it wasn't freely chosen, determined by nothing, which means it was random and still not free. The moment you chose to watch this video, it was because of a thumbnail, a title, a recommendation, an unconscious impulse to seek answers. None of those were under your control. The algorithm tugged, your curiosity nudged, your boredom whispered, and your so-called freedom was just the outcome of the louder whisper. Even indecision, in humans, is not neutral. Your delay in acting is shaped by aversion to risk, fear of regret, memories of failure. The loop returns. So Buridan's donkey doesn't just starve in a field. It lives inside you, every time you hesitate, every time you flip a coin, every time your freedom is frozen by the demand to act without cause. And the irony, even the decision to move on to the next section of this video, that too has already been chosen. By the moment, by the frame, by the rhythm of your thoughts that were never really yours. Who, or what is making your decisions? Not what do you choose, but who is doing the choosing. When you say, I decided, who is the I you're referring to? A soul? A mind? A consistent inner being? Or is that just the echo of a voice trained to explain a process it never controlled? This is the foundation of one of the most disorienting theories in modern neuroscience and Eastern philosophy alike. The self is an illusion. The illusion of the choosing self is comforting. It lets you believe there's someone at the center of your mind, a pilot in the cockpit weighing options, taking responsibility, steering the vessel. But when scientists look inside the brain for this self, they never find it. There is no central command. No glowing orb labeled me. Just billions of neurons firing in chaotic, coordinated waves, processing memories, reacting to stimuli, generating feelings, estimating risks, modeling futures. And these processes happen without a single unified observer. The mind is modular, built from parts. Some areas handle visual input, others emotional salience, others language, others motivation. All of them interact, but none of them are you. What we call I is just a story told by the brain, about the brain to keep the brain coherent. In the 1970s, neuroscientist Michael Gazzaniga performed split-brain experiments that changed everything. Patients who had their corpus callosum severed, the bridge between the brain's two hemispheres, could no longer transfer information between left and right. In one famous example, the right hemisphere was shown an image which couldn't be verbalized, and the left hemisphere, responsible for speech, invented a completely false explanation for why the subject was doing something. The verbal side made up a story, completely unaware it was guessing. The left brain became the interpreter, not the chooser. It didn't know the truth, but it needed a reason, so it fabricated one, not to deceive others, but to preserve its own illusion of agency. That sets what the self does. It doesn't set choose, it justifies. It explains decisions it didn't initiate, using language it didn't design, with a sense of ownership it didn't earn. And because it feels natural, you never question it. When you say, I felt like going outside, that feeling emerged from layers of environmental stimuli, subconscious associations, circadian rhythms and hormonal changes. Then after all of that, your mind strings together a neat explanation and says, I decided. But the choice was made long before the voice of I arrived. Sam Harris, a neuroscientist and philosopher, puts it like this. Thoughts simply arise in consciousness. You don't author them. You don't choose your next thought. It appears, and then you claim it. You say, that's mine, but you didn't craft it. You didn't foresee it. You didn't summon it. It just happened. And yet this illusion is necessary. Without it, the story falls apart. Without a you who navigates the world, who maintains continuity, who accepts blame, who receives praise. Society needs the self. Morality depends on the chooser. Culture rewards it. Religion demands it. But in the silence of your own mind, outside the roles and rewards, you know something that's wrong. You feel it, that hollow pause between intention and action, that eerie sense that the thought already arrived before you welcomed it, that maybe you are just the passenger and the road is already mapped. And if there is no core you doing the choosing, Then what is freedom? Just another character in the story. Just another illusion, authored by a narrator who never held the pen. What if the choice you make now changes the past? No metaphor, no magic, just physics. Welcome to one of the most unsettling experiments in quantum mechanics, the delayed choice quantum eraser, a phenomenon so bizarre it challenges the very foundation of time, causality, and yes, free will. It begins with the infamous double-slit experiment, fire photons, tiny particles of light, at a screen with two slits. If you measure which slit they go through, they behave like particles, taking one path or the other. But if you don't measure them, they behave like waves, creating interference patterns as if they went through both slits simultaneously. The act of observation determines their behavior. Weird? Absolutely, but it gets worse. In 1999, physicists Yoon Ho Kim and colleagues built on this with the delayed choice quantum eraser. Here's what they did. A photon passes through the double-slit apparatus and is then split into an entangled pair. One photon goes to a detector where its path can be known or unknown. The other, called the signal photon, goes to a different detector where the interference pattern may or may not appear. Here sits the twist. Whether or not the photon creates an interference pattern, wave-like behavior, depends on a decision made after it has already hit the detector. In other words, a choice made in the present determines how the photon behaved in the past. Reality retroactively adjusts. You are no longer dealing with a world where events happen in clean sequence. You are in a domain where the future can alter the past, where observation itself rewrites history. Now pause. If a particle's behavior can be changed after the fact, what does that mean for your brain? After all, your brain is made of particles, your thoughts, your neurons, your memories, all governed by quantum-level interactions. And if the act of measurement can rewrite a particle-sep's past, could the act of consciousness be retroactively rewriting yours? This isn't science fiction. It sits the terrifying edge of what modern physics has already confirmed in laboratories. Some interpretations suggest that your choices are not just influenced by the past, but that your present awareness may select which version of the past becomes real. So when you say, "I made that choice," the universe may be nodding and saying, "Yes, and we have edited accordingly." But where does free will go in a world like this? If your choices are entangled with events that are not yet observed, if your reality depends on a quantum coin flip decided after the fact, then you are not choosing from a menu of real options. You are riding a wave function of all possibilities, collapsing into one post hoc while believing it was always meant to be. This is no longer about decision-making. This is about the fabric of existence. And in that fabric, choice becomes slippery. Are you choosing which path to take? Or are you merely the observer collapsing the version of you that already took it? The self, then, is not the driver. It is the observer. And the observed, and the edited footage, stitched together to feel like a life. So ask yourself, if time can flow backward, if causality bends, how can anything, including you, be truly free? What if your brain disagreed with itself, and you never noticed? What if one half of your mind made decisions, and the other half invented reasons after the fact, with full confidence, utterly unaware it was lying? Welcome to the unnerving world of the split brain experiment, where the illusion of a single unified self collapses into fragments, and with it the idea that you are making choices. In the 1960s and 70s, neuroscientist Michael Gazzaniga, working with Roger Sperry, studied patients whose brains had been surgically split. To reduce severe epilepsy, surgeons had cut the corpus callosum, the thick band of nerve fibers connecting the brain's left and right hemispheres. These patients functioned normally in most areas of life, but in carefully controlled experiments something astonishing emerged. Each hemisphere of the brain was still active, but now disconnected. Each side had its own perceptions, its own responses, and perhaps its own version of you. Here is just the most famous scene. A patient sits staring straight ahead. Visual information sent to the left. Visual field is processed by the right hemisphere, and vice versa. Gazzaniga flashes an image of a snow scene to the right hemisphere and a picture of a chicken claw to the left. Then he asks the patient, "What did you see?" The verbal left hemisphere, which saw the chicken claw, answers, "A chicken claw." Then the patient is told to point to a related image using their left hand, controlled by the right hemisphere. The left hand points to a snow shovel. When asked why they picked the shovel, the verbal left hemisphere, unaware of the snow image, quickly invents a story. "Oh, you need a shovel to clean out the chicken coop." The brain just lied, instantly, calmly, with confidence. This is the interpreter module in action. The left hemisphere's job of making meaning, even when it has incomplete information. It doesn't say "I don't know," it fabricates, it justifies, it protects the illusion of agency. This should terrify you, because you do this every day. When you act on impulse and then explain it as intuition. When you rationalize a bad decision after the fact. When you convince yourself you always wanted something you never considered before. That sets the interpreter at work. The split brain experiments reveal that the unity of the self is not a given, it's a performance, held together by language, memory, and seamless storytelling. But beneath that surface, the mind is modular, fractured, plural. So how can free will exist in a mind that isn't one thing? If your two hemispheres can act independently even in conflict, then who is the you that chooses? And more disturbingly, if your conscious mind can fabricate reasons to defend choices it didn't make, then how many of your so-called decisions are nothing more than post hoc cover stories? You don't lie to others. You lie to yourself, first, deepest and most convincingly. The truth is this: your brain can act without you. Your self can invent justifications to protect the illusion of authorship. And the person you think you are is a stitched-together narrator watching a body move on its own. This is not dysfunction. This is how you work. So if half a brain can act without the other knowing, how sure are you that you are whole? And if the self is split, scattered, stitched, then what is free will but the thread trying to hold the illusion together? Two drivers leave a party after drinking the same amount of alcohol. Both are equally impaired. Both make the same mistake. They drift slightly over the center line. One driver's path is clear. They arrive home safely. The other hits a pedestrian and kills them. One is a criminal. The other is just unlucky. But if their actions were the same, why is one condemned and the other free? This is the riddle of moral luck, a paradox that slices through our entire system of justice, responsibility, and free will. Coined by philosopher Thomas Nagel, moral luck challenges the idea that we are only responsible for what we can control. It suggests that many of the things we're praised or punished for depend not on choice, but on chance. Take talent, intelligence, upbringing, even your impulse control. You didn't choose your genes, you didn't choose your childhood, you didn't choose your culture or the events that shaped your personality, yet society holds you accountable, as if you did. You are punished for being aggressive, rewarded for being disciplined, even though both traits were formed long before you had the tools to reflect on them. It gets worse. In the real world, outcomes shape how we judge actions. If you try to hurt someone and fail, you're treated more leniently than if you succeed, even though your intentions were identical. If a reckless decision leads to disaster, you're condemned. But if the same decision ends in success, you're applauded. The same will judged by different fates. This is the trap. We claim to believe in free will, but we punish based on consequences. We claim to judge character, but we're ruled by results. We say responsibility belongs to the individual, but we measure it by events outside their control. Moral luck turns free will into a performance graded by chaos. Now imagine yourself on trial, everything you've done, every mistake, every triumph, being evaluated through a lens of contingency. What if you'd been born in a war zone, abused as a child, or simply had different hormones on a different day? Would you still be you? Or would your choices be someone else's entirely? When you condemn a criminal, you condemn their luck. When you praise a hero, you praise a lottery ticket of nature and nurture. In both cases, the will becomes a spectator, swept up in storms it didn't summon. Nagel's point is not that morality is meaningless, but that it's deeply contaminated by the very forces we pretend it transcends. The concept of moral responsibility assumes free will, but moral luck shows that the playing field was tilted from the start. So how can you be free when your fate is filtered through dice rolls you never saw? Even your regret, your guilt, your pride, all born from circumstances, outcomes, and consequences that may have unfolded differently in another timeline. In a different place, with a different brain, on a different night. You might have been the criminal, or the victim, or no one at all, and the fact that you is not your choice. It's just your luck. Let's say you flip a coin. It lands on heads. Was that a choice? No, it was random. Now imagine the same randomness applied to your thoughts. You wake up one day craving oranges instead of apples. No reason, no intention, just an impulse, sudden and unexplained. Does that make you more free, or less? This is the paradox. Randomness does not equal freedom, yet many people treat it as if it does. When determinism, the idea that everything is caused, feels too suffocating, people flee to its opposite, indeterminism. The hope is simple: if my decisions aren't determined, then maybe they're free. But randomness isn't freedom, it's chaos. If your choices are the result of unpredictable quantum events or neural noise, then they're not yours, they're accidents. A dice roll in your prefrontal cortex, a glitch in your neurons, a signal blur masquerading as desire. And here lies the trap. If your decisions are determined, you are not free, you are caused. If your decisions are random, you are not free, you are chaotic. So what kind of decision would be free? It would have to be neither caused nor random, an act that arises independently, outside the universe of causality in the realm of noise. But such a thing has never been observed, not in nature, not in the lab, not in you. Every human decision seems to fall into one of two categories. It's predictable, shaped by reasons, but then it's not free, just logical. Or it's spontaneous, arising without clear cause, but then it's not owned, just accidental. Freedom, true freedom, would mean being the originator of your will, but how can you originate anything when your very sense of I is built from ingredients you didn't choose? Your DNA, your past, your memories, your attention, your fatigue, your hormones, your mood, your dreams, even your gut feeling, the most primal form of choice, is a soup of signals you did not consciously brew. Some philosophers call this the luck problem, others call it the ownership gap, the space between a thought appearing in your head and your belief that you created it, but in both cases the problem remains. If randomness caused it, you didn't det. If causality caused it, you didn't est. And yet, you still feel like the decider. You still say, I chose this. Why? Because the brain's interpreter, that smooth-talking narrator from earlier, weaves the illusion of agency from whatever materials it has, no matter how broken. It doesn't care if the decision was caused or random. It cares that the story feels good. And so randomness becomes a costume for freedom, a mask, a decoy. You flip a coin, it lands heads, you smile and say, that's what I wanted. But you didn't choose heads, you just liked the outcome. This is the lie we live by, mistaking unpredictability for authorship. But a random will is no more free than a machine's will. It's just harder to trace. So the next time you act on impulse, ask yourself, was that freedom? Or was that just a coin, flipping inside your skull? Certainly, here is the full standalone script for the No-Self Doctrine, written in your standard TPP paradox format, 950 words. This version is self-contained, hypnotic, paradoxical, and designed to fit seamlessly into your long-form videos. Close your eyes. Try to find the one who is thinking. Not the thoughts, not the emotions, not the memories or the feelings they trigger. Not the stories, roles, or titles. Just the you behind all of it. Now hold still. Look again. Where is it? If you look closely, honestly, quietly, you may start to notice something strange. There is no one home. The thoughts appear, but there is no thinker. The decisions form, but no decider. The life unfolds, but the self never truly arrives. This is the No-Self Doctrine, or anatta, in ancient Buddhist philosophy. The idea that the self, the thing you cling to, protect, decorate, and define, does not actually exist. Not as a fixed thing, not as a continuous being, not as a captain steering the ship. But wait, you protest. I feel like myself. I remember my past. I know who I am. Do you? Or have you simply memorized a story and mistaken it for a source? Science now echoes what monks and sages have whispered for centuries. Your brain is not unified, it is modular, fragmented. The self is not a command center, it's a user interface. A front-end experience made to feel smooth, even though behind the curtain dozens of subsystems are negotiating, conflicting, predicting, and reacting. There is no single you, just networks, just patterns. Psychologist Bruce Hood calls the self a convenient fiction. Neuroscientist N.L. Seth says consciousness is a controlled hallucination. Philosopher Thomas Metzinger says the self is a model with no access to the model. And in meditation it becomes terrifyingly clear: thoughts arise and pass. Sensations arise and pass. Urges, intentions, emotions, all arise and pass. But what about the one watching? That seps the trick. Even the observer is part of the stream. You say, I am aware. But that awareness has no shape, no form, no identity. It's not you, it's just the screen on which things appear. And when nothing appears, it too disappears. You believe in continuity because memory gives you a highlight reel. But look at that too. Can you remember what you were thinking 2 minutes ago? Can you hold a thought without it slipping? The self is like a flame, flickering, moving, never fixed. Or a wave rising from the ocean, appearing as a form, but made only of motion. Yet this flicker runs your life. You defend it. You build empires around it. You fear for its future, mourn its past, and feed its hunger for meaning. But you've never actually seen it. Only believed it was there. This belief gives rise to every kind of suffering. Because if there's a you, then there's something to protect. Something to blame. Something to regret. Something to judge. Something to lose. But if there sits no fixed self, then maybe there sits nothing left to damage. This doesn't mean life is meaningless. It means life is free from the burden of permanence. Imagine how much energy you've spent maintaining this character, crafting the perfect story, being the right person in the right room, convincing yourself you're consistent, coherent, in charge. Now imagine if you let go of being someone. Let go of needing a center. Let go of the loop that asks, who am I? And hear the silence that answers, no one and everything. Because without a self, there sets just this: a sound, a breath, a rising feeling, a dissolving thought. And it sets enough. You are not the cloud. You are the sky. Not the contents. The container. Not the story. The screen. But even the sky shifts. Even the screen flickers. Even the container empties. And in that emptiness, freedom isn't found. It's revealed. Because if you are not the self, then you are not trapped. There is no doer, no thinker, no sufferer, only doing, only thinking, only suffering, and even that, passing like wind. So stop searching. You will not find yourself. Because you were never lost. You were never even there. Imagine a universe where everything that happens because of physics. Not because of souls. Not because of intentions. Not because of inner wills. Just particles, bouncing. This is the principle of causal closure of the physical. The foundational idea that every physical event in the universe has a physical cause, no exceptions. Every change in your body, your brain, your environment, all traceable to other physical processes. In such a universe, where is the room for free will? Let's break this down. Your brain is made of matter. That matter obeys the laws of physics. If an atom in your brain moves, it moves because something caused it, an electron, a force, a signal, a field. There is no magic gap where you can reach in and redirect it. So when you decide to raise your hand, what caused that? Neurons fired, synapses opened, sodium and potassium ions rushed across membranes, electrical signals leapt between cells, and those signals were triggered by previous signals, and those by others still, in a chain of causes, going back not just seconds but centuries. If you zoom in far enough, your decision wasn't a choice, it was a reaction, a deterministic ripple, in a vast sea of physical necessity. The philosopher Jaegwon Kim put it bluntly, If the physical world is causally closed, then any mental event that causes a physical action must itself be reducible to physical causes, otherwise it breaks the chain, but no such break has ever been found. In other words, if your mind can cause your body to act, it must be because the mind is just the brain, and the brain is just physics. There is no ghost in the machine. There is only the machine. This might sound dehumanizing, even hopeless, but it's simply consistency. If you believe in science, if you believe in medicine, chemistry, and biology, then you're already betting on a universe where events happen because of physical law, not metaphysical will. Some try to rescue free will by appealing to dualism, the idea that the mind is somehow non-physical, hovering above the material world like a soul in the cockpit. But this leads to problems. How does the non-physical affect the physical? There's no evidence. Why does damage to the brain change the self if the self is separate? Why do drugs, trauma, or electricity alter personality if will comes from beyond? Every sign points back to the same conclusion. Your thoughts are not outside the world. They are in it, made of it, governed by it. Even your most profound, spontaneous decisions are products of physical states, brain chemistry, blood sugar, temperature, sleep cycles, dopamine levels. The idea that a will floats freely above all that is not just unscientific, it's wishful thinking. Causal closure is cold, but it is honest. It doesn't say you stir a robot. It says you are nature. A deeply complex expression of physics, following rules so intricate you feel like you're choosing. But complexity is not freedom. It sets just harder to see the chain. And the chain never breaks. So next time you act, ask yourself, did I make this choice? Or did the molecules, the ones in my blood, my neurons, my bones, simply move, as they always must? And if they moved exactly as they had to, what exactly was free? You blink, you reach for your phone, you think, I should call her. But pause, what made that thought appear? Did you summon it, or did it simply arrive? This is the riddle of the unconscious decision maker, the part of your mind that acts before you do. It is silent, fast, powerful, and far more in control than the tiny sliver of consciousness that calls itself me. Modern neuroscience makes this uncomfortable clear. By the time you're aware of making a choice, the unconscious has already begun making it for you. Over and over, experiments show that our conscious mind lags behind, not by milliseconds but by entire mental processes. In 2008, psychologist Puppeteer found something strange. In his studies on complex decision-making, participants who didn't consciously deliberate often made better choices than those who did. When forced to rely on their gut, the unconscious processor, people filtered noise, weighed options, and acted more rationally than when they tried to consciously think through every detail. It wasn't reasoning, it was something deeper, something faster. Your unconscious mind is an iceberg, and consciousness is just the tip. The vast majority of your decisions, from how you form impressions, to how you move to what you say next, are shaped by patterns, memories, desires, and fears below the surface. Take this moment. Your eyes scan this text, your brain decodes the letters, your memory recalls meaning, your emotional centers gauge the tone, and before you decide to keep watching, a billion background processes have already nudged you forward. It's not just reflexes, it's not just autopilot, it's the core of how you operate. In fact, consciousness is more like a status update than a control panel. The unconscious makes the decision. The conscious self is simply informed, and then, like a clever press secretary, it creates a story that makes the decision feel intentional. You think, I just decided to stand. But the readiness potential, the neural preparation started before the thought arrived. You think, I chose to stay in this relationship. But your attachment circuits, fear patterns, and trauma responses were already steering. You think, I'm going to try harder next time. But the motivation or lack of it has already settled deep in your limbic system. This isn't a glitch, it's subs-evolution. If consciousness had to micromanage every heartbeat, every breath, every blink, you'd collapse in moments. The unconscious is the original decision maker, and it works because it doesn't ask for your permission. And here lies the paradox. If you don't choose your thoughts, if you don't control what desires arise, If your preferences, impulses and memories bubble up unbidden, then in what sense can you claim to be free? Even your resistance, your hesitation, your second-guessing, is just another layer of unconscious computation. You don't pull the strings, you feel them tug, and then decide that must have been your hand. But the real mover is in the dark, and it never asked for your name. So ask yourself, if the one who decides never introduces itself, who then is doing the choosing? And if the answer is no one, then what remains of will? Try this. Raise your hand. Now do it again, but this time delay it. Wait a moment, then do it, not when the urge first hits, but just after. Did you just exercise free will? It feels like it, like you interrupted an automatic process and inserted yourself into the timeline, a tiny rebellion, a conscious veto, a break in the loop. But this, the intentional stutter, is one of the most seductive illusions in the entire free will debate. The idea that you can pause before acting, hesitate before speaking, and choose not to follow the first impulse, and that this pause is where free will lives, that freedom is not the original impulse, but the interruption of it. But let's examine this pause more closely. Where did the hesitation come from? Did you choose to hesitate? Or did hesitation happen to you? Let's say you wanted to respond impulsively to a question, but then thought, wait, maybe I shouldn't. What caused that second thought? Was it you, or was it another unconscious process, a social cue, a fear of judgment, a learned inhibition? That stutter, that delay, wasn't born in a vacuum. It was shaped by years of conditioning, by emotional responses, by parental discipline, by cultural codes. The ability to hold back is not a mark of internal sovereignty, but the result of earlier causes working against newer ones. And here's the deeper paradox. If you couldn't hesitate, if your brain lacked the wiring to delay gratification or inhibit reflexes, then the stutter wouldn't occur. You'd act immediately, thoughtlessly, automatically. But if you can hesitate, it's because you were programmed to. Either way, it's SEPA's not free, it's SEPA's function. Now return to the Libet experiment, where subjects were told to flick their wrists at will. Some tried to delay their urge, to prove their freedom. But the EEG showed something strange. Even the intention to veto an action appeared after unconscious neural activity had already begun. The decision to not decide is just another decision made without your knowledge. Even when you believe you're stuttering by choice, the preconditions were already running. The prefrontal cortex, where self-control lives, didn't vote for freedom. It responded to reward pathways, risk analysis, learned behaviors. The stutter wasn't a gap in the system, it was the system. And yet, it feels like choice. It has to. Because if the stutter isn't freedom, if even that sacred pause isn't authored by a self, then what is left? A stream of urges, and a stream of inhibitors, neither chosen, just arising. You don't stat act. You don't stat resist. You witness the battle and call the outcome. So the next time you catch yourself saying, I could have acted but I chose not to, ask who chose. And if you trace the source of that hesitation far enough, you may not find a chooser at all, only a stutter in the flow. And the story you told yourself about what it meant. You see someone yawn, and you yawn too. You see a man wince in pain, and your face tightens before you realize. You watch a stranger feel joy, and something warm stirs inside your chest. Why? Because of mirror neurons, the quiet dictators of your brain. Discovered in the early 1990s by researchers studying monkeys, mirror neurons are a specific class of brain cells that activate not only when you perform an action, but when you observe someone else performing that action. If you see someone grasp a cup, the same neurons fire as if you were grasping it yourself. If you see someone cry, the blueprint of that emotion runs inside you, not as a copy but as a simulation. This might sound like empathy, and on the surface it is. But mirror neurons are deeper than that. They're the biological mechanism that makes you, the so-called autonomous agent, porous, programmable, contagious. They blur the boundary between observer and actor. You don't just see others, you simulate them, internally, automatically, before you think, before you choose. And that raises a disturbing possibility. What if many of your desires, reactions, and so-called decisions were never truly yours, but downloaded from others via unconscious mimicry? This is the mirror neuron dictatorship, the idea that much of what you call will is actually viral behavior. The people you admire, their speech patterns echo in yours. The posture of a powerful figure, you mimic it without knowing. The habits of your parents, they're not lessons, they're neurological echoes. You walk through life believing you're an original, but you are a mirror house of influence. Even your preferences can be traced back to what you've seen modeled. You think you like jazz, maybe your older sibling liked jazz, maybe your first crush played jazz, maybe your mirror neurons learned to feel pleasure when they watched someone else nod along to it. You weren't choosing, you were absorbing. In a study from the University of Parma, monkeys not only mirrored actions, they mirrored intentions. When they watched someone pick up a cup to drink, different neurons fired than when the person picked it up to clean. Meaning, your brain doesn't just copy the act, it predicts and simulates the goal. And it does so before conscious thought even has a chance to weigh in. Now scale that up. Your personality, your values, your behaviors in relationships, your career choices, your insecurities, your sense of humor, all filtered, shaped, and modeled after the behaviors of others, family, culture, media, friends, long before you had the cognitive maturity to question them. You are not alone in your mind. You are populated, and yet you still feel free, because the final product, the echo, the imitation, the mimicry, gets stitched into the illusion of self. You say, "That's just who I am," never realizing how much of you was carved by someone else's face, someone else's pain, someone else's joy. This isn't a flaw. It's evolution. Mimicry is survival. It builds tribes. It fosters learning, but it doesn't leave much space for autonomy. So if your will was built in others' set images, if your tastes were sculpted by unseen influences, if your behaviors arise from mirrored circuits, then what exactly was you? And if the mirror moves before you even realize you're reflecting, then maybe the person in the glass was never really free. You see a face for a split second, just a flash, a blur, and something inside you reacts. You like it, or you don't set. You don't know why. You don't recognize the face. You don't remember seeing it. But the feeling sticks. This is Zajonc's preference before thought, the unsettling finding that you feel before you think, that emotion precedes cognition, that liking or disliking something happens before you know you're evaluating anything at all. In 1980, psychologist Robert Zajonc ran a series of experiments that shook the foundations of decision theory. Participants were shown Chinese characters for fractions of a second, too fast to consciously process. Later they were asked to rate how pleasant each character was. The result? The more often they'd seen a symbol, even if they had no memory of it, the more they liked it. This became known as the mere exposure effect, and it reveals a devastating truth. Preference can be formed without awareness, without reasoning, without even a shred of memory. You don't decide to like. You just do. And then the brain backfills the logic to make it feel like a decision. You say, "I enjoy this artist because their lyrics are deep." But your preference was shaped in milliseconds, perhaps by the tone of their voice, the curve of their posture, or the smell of a room when the music played. Thought arrived after the feeling. Reason was just the cleanup crew. This sequence, feel and thought, is backwards from how we like to imagine the mind works. We believe we evaluate things, then feel based on that judgment, but in reality, much of what we think we've evaluated was decided before we even blinked. Now apply this to everything. Politics, romance, religion, morality, memory, identity. How many of your convictions are just emotional echoes polished into principles? How many times did your gut choose and your brain scrambled to justify? In marketing, Zajonc's theory is weaponized. Flash a logo, repeat it, associate it with positive imagery. Eventually your brain begins to like it, not because it's good, but because it's familiar. Repetition becomes affection. You are not reasoning. You are recognizing. You are not choosing. You are reacting. And these reactions shape your entire world. You vote for someone not because you agree with their platform, but because their face feels trustworthy. You fall in love not because of shared values, but because of a glance, a scent, a rhythm in their voice. You call these choices, but they were preferences, planted by exposure, carved by silence. Zajonc didn't just study preference. He rewrote free will. Because if preferences emerge before thought, and preferences drive decisions, then the chooser is always one step behind. The conscious self is never the cause, only the explainer, the poet of impulses, the mask of emotion. So next time you feel certain about a person, a product, a path, ask yourself, did I choose this? Or did I merely recognize it, love it, and pretend I had a reason? And if your reasons came later, were you ever free at all? Euster offered two choices. One promises safety, the other danger. But before you reason, before you calculate, you feel it. A twist in your gut, a pull in your chest, a subtle shift, as if your body knows before your mind does. That's not superstition, that's Damasio's somatic marker hypothesis, the idea that your body, not your rational mind, makes many of your decisions for you. In the 1990s, neuroscientist Antonio Damasio studied patients with damage to the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, an area of the brain crucial for connecting emotion to decision-making. These patients had normal intelligence, memory, and logic, but they couldn't make decisions, not even simple ones, like choosing a restaurant or deciding when to schedule a meeting. Why? Because they had no feeling about the outcomes. Damasio found that the body stores emotional markers, physical signals like heart rate, nausea, warmth, tension, tied to past experiences. These markers guide your future choices. When you consider a risky option, your body reacts before you think. That reaction nudges you, softly, invisibly, away from danger. This is the somatic marker, emotion embodied. But here sits where the paradox begins. You think you stir making decisions based on logic. In reality, you're consulting a body that has already voted. Even before a thought forms in your head, your body is reacting. The mere idea of a choice lights up muscle tension, blood pressure, pupil dilation. These aren't responses to your decision, they are ingredients in it. The somatic marker system is like a silent advisor whispering, this feels right or this feels wrong. You don't know why, you just follow the pull, and then your mind, eager for a narrative, constructs a reason to explain the feeling that already led you. A bad vibe becomes I didn't set like his tone. A flutter in the chest becomes it just felt like the right move. A tightening in the stomach becomes something told me not to go. But the story comes second. The decision was already in motion. And here's the deeper truth, these markers aren't yours in the way you think. They were programmed by experience, trauma, culture, childhood, reward, punishment. Your fear of confrontation, that's an echo of how conflict was punished. Your instinct to apologize, that's a reflex built by approval seeking. Your so-called intuition is a quilt stitched from emotional scar tissue. So when you say I went with my gut, remember your gut was trained. It is not free. It is not wise. It is conditioned. And yet, it controls you. Damasio's work reveals that emotion is not the enemy of reason, it's the scaffolding. Without it, decision-making collapses. But when emotion leads and logic follows, then your conscious self is no longer the architect. It's the interpreter, arriving late, praising the structure it didn't design. You don't choose your feelings. You don't choose your reactions. But your choices are built from both. So what's left of free will? When your body leans toward answers before you've even heard the question, why did you click this video? You might say, because I was curious. Or because I wanted to understand myself better. But push deeper. Why that curiosity? Why that impulse at that exact moment? This is where we meet the principle of sufficient reason, a quiet, ancient axiom that haunts every theory of freedom. First articulated by Leibniz, this principle claims that nothing happens without a reason. Every fact, every event, every decision has an explanation, even if you can't see it. It may be buried, obscured, or complex, but it's there. There is always a cause. At first it sounds harmless. Of course things have reasons. But then, the implications unfold. If everything you do has a sufficient reason, then none of your actions arise independently. Each decision is the consequence of prior causes, genetic, environmental, psychological. There is no room for spontaneity that isn't, in fact, just unexplained determinism. Imagine a river. You watch it bend around a rock and say, that's just how it flows. But why? Because of gravity, terrain, past erosion, rainfall, the shape of the valley. Every drop follows the shape it must. You can set point to a splash and say, that one was free. Now imagine your mind is the river. Your thoughts bend around memories, trauma, language, hormones, goals, fears, dopamine. Every mental motion has a trail. The illusion of spontaneity is just complexity moving too fast to trace. When you say I acted freely, what you often mean is I don't know what caused that, but ignorance is not evidence of freedom. It just means the cause is hidden. This principle corners free will with brutal logic. Let sets play it out. If you made a decision for a reason, then your decision was caused, not free. If you made a decision for no reason, then it was random, not free. In both cases, the will is compromised. Either it's a domino in a chain of necessity, or a coin toss in the void. Some try to escape this with self-causation. I am the reason for my own actions. But this too collapses. Because if you are the cause, then what caused you to be that way? Your personality, your past, your DNA, your culture, all of which you did not choose. You can't be the author of yourself. That would require you to exist before you existed. To choose the chooser, a paradox with no exit. Even your desire to be free is just another phenomenon that obeys this principle. Why do you want freedom? Because you were raised in a culture that idealizes it. Because you felt the pain of control. Because stories taught you to crave agency. Because your neurons fire in ways that produce the illusion of will. There is no floating you beyond these causes. Only the story they assemble. So what does the principle of sufficient reason leave us? A universe without gaps. A mind without independence. A self that dreams of choosing while being chosen. And in that tight, suffocating logic, freedom isn't disproven. It simply disappears. You lie to yourself every day. Not the big lies, not I'm fine when you're breaking, or I don't care when you do. No, it sits deeper, suppler, built into your architecture. You lie by believing you are in control. This is recursive self-deception, the strange loop where the mind tricks itself about itself, a feedback loop of ignorance, preservation, and illusion, all wired to protect the story that you are the agent behind your life. Here it's how it works. You perform an action, then you construct a reason, then you forget that you constructed it, then you believe the reason was the cause, then you defend that belief, as if it's truth. It sets not manipulation, it sets survival. Psychologists have long studied confabulation, when people unconsciously fabricate explanations for their behavior, not to deceive others, but to maintain coherence within themselves. For example, patients with brain injuries might be asked why they just stood up even though they didn't consciously decide to. They'll respond, I needed to stretch, or I was going to the bathroom, without realizing the movement was spontaneous, unchosen, or triggered by an external prompt. The lie isn't set malicious. It sets recursive. The brain doesn't just misreport. It rewrites, then it believes its own rewrite. And this isn't limited to damaged brains. You do this too, every day. You justify the relationship you stayed in. You defend the career you chose. You explain why you forgave someone, or didn't set. You narrate a life of decisions that may have been dictated by fear, pressure, chemicals, or habit, and still say, I decided. Recursive self-deception operates like a looped mirror. Each belief reflects another. Each story props up the next. Until the origin is lost, and all that remains is a self gazing back at itself, convinced it was always whole. The philosopher Daniel Dennett argues that consciousness itself is a center of narrative gravity, not a command center, but a story so dense, it feels real. That story must be protected. And the best way to protect it? Deceive yourself. Convince the storyteller that it's also the author. That it doesn't just explain behavior, it causes it. But here sits the glitch. Every layer of that explanation is shaped by prior experiences, themselves shaped by causes you didn't control. The you that tells the story is built from past stories. Your current values were influenced by past environments. Your justifications were shaped by your beliefs. And those beliefs, formed by feelings, memories, mirror neurons, and emotional scars. You say, I changed my mind. But even that change was triggered by new information, by pain, by timing. And now your mind narrates the change as a victory of free will. It wasn't set. It was the latest edit in a script you never authored. Recursive self-deception isn't set a bug. It seps your default operating system. Without it, you said crumble. With it you feel whole. Even if that wholeness is just the eye of the storm. So the next time you say, I did this because, pause. Ask yourself, was that the real reason? Or the most comfortable one? And if the answer was written to preserve the illusion of freedom, then who exactly is being fooled? You were born before you knew yourself. Your eyes opened, your lungs inflated, your heart beat without asking. And already, a million invisible instructions had been printed into your cells: who you would be, what you would fear, how you would love, how long you might live. You didn't choose your body. You didn't choose your brain. You didn't choose the factory settings of you. This is the genetic loop, the silent algorithm running beneath every thought, every impulse, every so-called decision you make. It is the paradox of a you shaped by blueprints you had no hand in writing, but which control the very tools you use to believe you're in control. Your genes determine far more than eye color or height. They shape your dopamine sensitivity, your risk aversion, your emotional volatility, your reward circuits, even your political leanings. In recent studies, certain genetic profiles correlate with liberal versus conservative tendencies, with openness to experience, with religious belief, or lack thereof. You didn't decide how suggestible you are. You didn't choose your patience or your appetite, or your capacity for long-term planning. These traits arrived with you, like luggage delivered to your room before you checked in. And yet, we punish people for being impulsive. We reward people for being disciplined. We call it willpower. But what if willpower is genetic too? Let vets zoom out. You're faced with a moral dilemma, something complex. You feel pulled toward compassion or anger. You weigh options. You decide. But that decision was shaped by your prefrontal cortex density, how much impulse control you inherited. Your amygdala reactivity, how strongly you respond to threat. Your serotonin transport genes, which regulate mood, anxiety, and patience. Your MAOA gene expression, sometimes dubbed the warrior gene, linked to aggression. And beyond your biology, your gene expression was shaped by epigenetics, how your environment turned genes on or off during key stages of development. Trauma can change gene expression. So can neglect. So can love. So can culture. You were not simply born with a set of traits. Your genes were dancing with your environment the whole time, forming a loop that defines how you think, feel, and choose. So where in that loop is freedom? If your behavior is driven by preferences, and those preferences are shaped by traits, and those traits are shaped by genes, which you did not choose, then every decision is the outcome of a process set in motion before you existed. Some try to escape this by saying, yes, my genes influence me, but I still make conscious choices. But that consciousness is built on those traits. You are not separate from your biology. You are your biology. There is no you behind the genes, only the illusion of a driver, built from the steering wheel itself. So next time you say, that sep's just how I am, recognize what that really means. It means your code is running. It means the loop is closed. It means that freedom, in the way you dream it, may have never entered the room. You press a button and a light turns on. You feel it. I did that. But what if the light was programmed to flicker regardless of your touch, and your sense of agency was just a story your brain told afterward? This is the phantom agency illusion, the eerie phenomenon where we feel responsible for actions we didn't cause and fail to recognize actions we did. The mind is not a perfect historian. It doesn't log every input and output like a computer. Instead, it infers agency, guesses who did what and when. If the guess feels right, the brain calls it me. If it feels wrong, the brain says not me, but feeling is not fact. In a 2003 study by Daniel Wegner, participants were asked to move a computer mouse while watching a screen. Unknown to them, the cursor was being subtly controlled by someone else. But if the cursor moved in line with their expectations, the participants still believed they were in control. As long as the outcome aligned with what they thought they would do, the illusion of agency remained intact. This isn't just a lab trick, it happens every day. You take credit for a lucky outcome. You deny responsibility for a failure you initiated. You feel guilt for something that was never your fault. You feel proud of a result mostly produced by luck, timing, or someone else's help. Why? Because agency is not a fact, it's a feeling. And that feeling can be fooled. Now imagine this on a larger scale. What if many of the things you believe you chose, your career, your beliefs, your friendships, were actually orchestrated by forces outside your awareness? What if your brain, eager to preserve the illusion of selfhood, simply assigned authorship to you after the fact? Like a ghostwriter who adds your name to a book you didn't write. The philosopher Thomas Metzinger argues that the self is a transparent self-model, a virtual avatar the brain constructs, then forgets it constructed. You see you in the mirror, feel you making choices, believe in the narrative of you, but all of it is simulation. The agency you feel is a phantom, constructed after the action to give your life coherence. This is why people can be tricked into believing they moved a hand when they didn't, or felt guilty for causing a beat they didn't trigger, or claimed control over random events just because they happened after a gesture. The timing is enough. The mind fills in the rest. Even your inner monologue, that stream of thoughts you think you're producing, often reacts to impulses that began milliseconds earlier. The decision is already rising, the action already forming, but when the words arrive, they say stamped authored by me. But if your sense of control can be fabricated, if you can feel agency when none exists, then how many of your choices were ever real? Maybe you're not the actor. You're the character written to believe it's acting. So ask yourself, if you feel in control, but control can be forged, and if yourself is just a model, then what is the you that claims to be free? And if the real decisions happen in silence, then who's really pulling the strings? You make a choice. It feels right, in the moment. But hours later, or maybe even seconds, it hits you. Regret. Why? Because the brain didn't finish evaluating the decision until after you made it. This is the neuroscience of regret timing, the revelation that your sense of right and wrong, your emotional response to choices, your internal approval stamp often arrives too late. You decide, then you feel, then, if the feeling is wrong, your brain backpedals, revises, and rewrites history. And you say, I shouldn't just have done that. But by then it's done. In 2006, researchers using functional MRI scanned participants while they played a gambling game. When the players made risky bets and lost, the orbit of frontal cortex lit up, the brain region associated with evaluating outcomes and regret. But the timing revealed something odd. The emotional experience of regret lagged behind the decision itself. The brain had made a move. The body reacted. And only afterward did the feeling emerge, an attempt to claim authorship. But here sits the paradox. If the system that judges your choices is reactive, if it arrives late to the scene, then what part of you is doing the choosing? This timing gap creates a terrifying possibility. You are not the responsible agent you believe you are. You're the narrator who feels pride or shame after the plot twist has already aired. And this isn't set just about gambling. Think about it. You send a message you later delete. You eat something you regret. You stay silent when you wish you said spoken. You act out, then explain, then feel. The regret doesn't come from the self. It constructs the self. You define who you are by what you wish you'd done differently, but only after the moment has passed. Regret retroactively creates identity. It says that wasn't me, but of course it was. Just not the you like to believe in. And sometimes that same process works in reverse. You make a reckless decision. It turns out well. And suddenly, the regret fades, replaced by confidence, even pride. The story shifts. The past is rewritten. The decision is now mine. It worked out, so I must have known what I was doing. But you didn't instead. You rolled the dice. Your brain waited to see the outcome, and then decided how you felt about your past. Regret, like memory, is editable. It sets not the fingerprint of your will. It's the eraser your brain uses to adjust the illusion of control. So if you don't feel regret until after the choice, and if regret changes based on outcomes you couldn't foresee, then what does that say about your authorship? You aren't just revising the past. You're still constructing it. On delay. Through feeling. You aren't the decider. You're the emotional editor. So next time you look back and say, that wasn't me. Ask, then who made the decision? And if your regret is just a late breaking news alert, what does that make you? You stand before a mirror moving your hand. It moves with you. You smile. It smiles. You wave. It waves. It seems so clear. I am the one in control. But what if the mirror moved first? This is the puppeteer's mirror, the haunting idea that the feeling of control is not a product of actual control, but the result of perceived synchronization between intention and outcome. The body moves. The thought arrives. The mirror reflects. And somewhere in that loop the illusion of authorship is born. Neurologists call this the sense of agency, the feeling that I am the one causing this action, this result, this reality. But experiments show that this sense is easily fooled. All it takes is a subtle misalignment between action and outcome, and the illusion collapses. Or worse, the illusion strengthens even when you're not in control. In one experiment, subjects watched a computer screen where a cursor moved. Sometimes, their own mouse controlled it, sometimes it didn't. But as long as the movement matched their expectations, participants believed they were in control, even when they weren't. The mirror showed the right image. So the brain said, that's me. This is the puppeteer trick. You watch your life reflect your thoughts. And you assume you were pulling the strings. But what if the thoughts came after the motion? What if you laughed not because you decided to, but because your body laughed, and then your brain rushed in with an explanation? I found it funny, you say. But maybe your face moved first, and your conscious mind caught up late and stitched the feeling into place. Now imagine that same mechanism applied to your entire life. You fall in love and then explain why. You lash out in anger, then justify it with reasons. You take a risk, win, and say it was foresight, not chance. You chase dreams born of unmet needs, then write poetry about destiny. The puppet moves. The mirror smiles. The self claps, convinced it was in charge. But all of it was downstream, from impulses, from habits, from hunger and hope. From patterns you didn't choose, reflecting back a version of you that never held the strings. And here sips the cruelest twist. Even when the puppet knows it is being moved, it still watches the mirror and thinks, that's me. You say I want to be free. But where did that desire come from? The mirror. The echo. The unseen puppeteer whose face you'll never see, because every time you try the reflection smiles back and says, you're in control. But the strings tighten. The show continues. And the applause was always pre-recorded. Every decision you have ever made. Picture this. Every crossroads, every hesitation, every what if. Not just in imagination but in reality. All of them happened. Somewhere, there's a version of you that turned left instead of right. Another version that never watched this video. Another that became a criminal. A monk. A god. A ghostwriter. This is hyperdeterminism in multiverse theory, the idea that in a universe where all possible outcomes occur, choice is no longer liberation, it's inevitability, just distributed. Let's rewind. In quantum physics, the many worlds interpretation proposes that every time a quantum event could go one way or another, the universe splits. Every possibility plays out in a new branching world. Now apply this to your choices. Every fork in the road you've faced didn't require your will to collapse into one outcome. Every version played out. One universe where you said yes, one where you said no, one where you never existed to choose. In this framework you are not free because you made a choice, you are guaranteed to have made all of them. Every option is expressed. Your personal experience of decision is just one thread in an infinitely branching web. You think you chose vanilla, but in another universe you chose chocolate. and in another you never tasted ice cream. Free will feels sacred because you remember choosing, but memory is limited. You can't feel the branching, you can't sense the copies, you only experience one path, and mistake that narrowness for authorship. But you didn't create the path. You wrote it. And here sips the darker twist. In a deterministic universe you could argue that only one future exists, but in a multiverse, all futures exist, and you are not special, you are not the chooser, you are the witness to a branch that was going to happen anyway, somewhere. In this view, will is not agency, it's placement. The self you call you is the observer standing in a room of infinite doors, and you only ever remember the one you walked through. The rest, no matter how plausible, vanish behind the fog of memory. You don't create the choice. So what's the difference between fate and freedom in a system where everything happens? You don't select it. You inhabit it. The feeling of I chose this is like a character in a book saying, I wrote this chapter. The line was always going to be said, by someone somewhere in some version. And here sticks where hyperdeterminism seals the paradox. Even your desire to reject this theory, that too exists. A version of you rages against it. Another forgets it. Another embraces it. But none of them escape it. You don't make choices to define yourself. And in the vast sea of infinite selves, you are defined by which version of the choice stream your consciousness is floating in. In a garden of forking fates you never chose to tend. If not just the echo of a path already walked. What is you? You think you make decisions because of the facts. But what if the decision was made before the facts arrived? What if you were nudged, not by argument, not by reason, but by the context in which the message was delivered? This is Pre-Suasion, a concept coined by psychologist Robert Cialdini, the idea that the most effective form of influence doesn't come after the message, but before it. It's not what you say, it's what the brain has been primed to receive. And it rewrites everything you believe about choice. In one experiment, researchers asked people walking by a bakery to answer a survey. Those who were approached while standing near the scent of warm pastries were far more agreeable and generous, even though they weren't aware the smell was influencing them. Another study showed that people were more likely to agree with a message about security when standing next to a hand sanitizer station. Why? Because the subtle environmental cue of cleanliness activated thoughts of safety, which then biased their decision. No arguments, no logic, just priming. The mind was nudged, and it never noticed. Now multiply that by every storefront you've ever walked past, every website you've clicked, every tone of voice, every color scheme, every pause in a sentence timed to make a word feel heavier. These are not coincidences, they are neural hijacks. Because your attention, your precious, sacred, seemingly private attention, can be manipulated long before you know it's even present. When you're shown an image of a doctor before receiving health advice, you trust it more. When you're asked, are you an adventurous person? Before being offered a vacation package, you're more likely to say yes. The question frames the brain. The brain adjusts. You make the choice. But that choice was already shaped by framing. And framing is not thinking. It is neural choreography. Even your mood hijacks your decisions. Sadness makes you more detail-oriented. Happiness makes you more gullible. Fear sharpens your focus, but narrows it. Music tempo, lighting temperature, even the fonts on a screen can guide your perception, and with it, your decisions. This is not magic, it sets design. And your brain, hungry for coherence, flooded with subconscious pattern detection, is easy to steer. So what happens to free will in this landscape? If your preferences are sensitive to context, if your beliefs shift based on the weather, the smell, the background music, if your choices are soft targets for whoever gets to your neurons first, then what exactly are you choosing? You not authoring your decisions. You're reacting to a script you didn't write, a sequence of cues and symbols engineered to trigger predictable outcomes. Even this video, this sentence, is using Pre-Suasion. Your mind is being prepared, gently, invisibly, to hear what comes next, and the fact that it feels natural is not a sign of freedom, it's a sign of alignment. You are flowing with the narrative, not controlling it. So the next time you feel sure about a choice, ask what came before it. What smells, sounds, words, lights, faces, What unseen fingers tilted the scale? And if your decisions were hijacked, not at the end, but at the start, then maybe freedom isn't broken. Maybe it was never yours to begin with. What if everything, your choices, your thoughts, your reality was running on someone else's code? Not metaphorically, literally. This is the simulation hypothesis, the provocative idea that our universe is not the base reality, but a computational simulation, like a hyper-realistic video game running on a super-intelligent system. And if that's true, then what you think of as free will may be nothing more than scripted behavior, generated by inputs and rendered in real time for someone else's observation. Sound absurd? Maybe. But some of the world's most serious thinkers, including Oxford's Nick Bostrom, Tesla's Elon Musk, and MIT's Max Tegmark, have argued that if technological progress continues, advanced civilizations will eventually create simulations indistinguishable from reality. And if they can, they will. And if they will, they likely already did. And now, here you are. Inside it. But let's put aside the sci-fi. Let's talk control. If you live inside a simulation, then every particle, every law of physics, every neuron in your brain, all operate according to code. The simulation may allow you to think you're making choices, but in reality you're just responding to inputs. Like a character in a game responding to keyboard strokes, unaware they are not in control of their own movements. Let's go deeper. A simulated brain made of simulated neurons behaves identically to a real one. That means your thoughts, emotions, and decisions are simulated processes. But simulated does not mean free. It means rendered, based on rules, conditions, and scripts that you neither created nor control. You might say, but I still feel like I'm choosing. Of course you do. That's part of the simulation. Freedom feels real inside the code. The illusion of agency is a feature, not a flaw. Just like in a video game, where non-playable characters NPCs decide to walk, speak, or react, not because they chose to, but because that's what the program told them to do. And here's the cruel beauty. If the simulation is advanced enough, the NPC becomes aware, but only of its own awareness, not of its boundaries. You stir not free. You stir self-aware, and you've mistaken that awareness for autonomy. Now ask yourself, have you ever had a truly original thought? One not shaped by culture, biology, or language, all artifacts of the system. Do you control your desires, or do they arise from places you can't access? Is your sense of purpose self-generated, or was it loaded into the level before you spawned? In a simulation, the architecture is fixed. The variables are constrained. The characters can want things, but they cannot transcend the code. Even your urge to reject this idea might be a fail-safe, a piece of protective programming to preserve the illusion of autonomy. If players knew they were simulated, the game would fall apart. So the system protects itself. With you. With your pride. With your doubt. With your sense of control. But none of that is proof you're free. It sets proof the simulation is working. So what's left of free will if reality itself is manufactured? You can still act. You can still feel. You can still love. But your choices, they may be nothing more than rendered outputs, based on inputs you were never allowed to see. And the voice inside you whispering, this can't be true. That too, might be written. You stir walking through a forest. The trees hum with wind. A deer stares at you. You reach out. It vanishes. And you wake up. It felt real, the sound, the movement, the decision to reach. But none of it was real. This is the dream argument, a concept explored by philosophers from Descartes to Chuang Tzu, and now reconsidered by neuroscience. If you can't reliably distinguish waking from dreaming, then how can you be sure any of your experiences, including your choices, are genuine? Because in dreams you also choose. You run from threats, you kiss strangers, you leap from buildings, you scream and laugh and cry. And every one of those actions feels like it's coming from you. But you didn't choose them. They arose, spontaneously, from a system you weren't aware you were inside. That's false agency, the sensation of authorship without authorship. Now here sets the nightmare. What if your waking life operates under the same rules? You believe you choose your job, your partner, your beliefs, But what if those choices are also dreamlike? Simulations unfolding in a stage set so well, the actor believes he's the director. Modern neuroscience reveals that dreams often mirror waking experiences, same logic, same emotional patterns, same limitations. But in dreams your conscious filter is relaxed. The default mode network, responsible for your self-narrative, weakens. The result? A freer flow of imagery and a stronger illusion of spontaneity. But here's the twist. Your waking consciousness relies on that same network, and it's also an illusion. You feel in control while awake, not because you're truly awake, but because the brain rehearses coherence. It stitches together fragments, thoughts, sensations, perceptions, into a movie called me, but that movie is not you, it's a loop. Dreams expose this by accident. When you dream, you still you, right? You still respond, plan, decide. But then you wake up and realize none of it was real. Your choices were shadows. The agency was fiction. So what if this right now is another level of dreaming? Not a literal dream perhaps, but a neural hallucination of control. The philosopher Thomas Metzinger suggests that the self is a transparent model. We don't see it as a model, we see it as truth. Just like in dreams, we don't realize we're dreaming, because the system hides its own code. Your sense of agency? A subroutine. Your memories of choice? Post hoc reconstructions. Your voice saying, I am awake? Just another layer of dreaming, nested deeper in the loop. Descartes tried to escape the dream with logic. I think therefore I am. But what if thinking is the dream? What if thought, intention, action, all unfold like dream logic, fluid, untraceable, automatic, yet claiming ownership? You think I stand up now. But in dreams you think that too, and you never question who thought it. Waking up doesn't prove control, it just proves that you weren't where you thought you were. So ask yourself, if you can dream of choosing, and feel agency in a world that doesn't exist, then what does that say about the waking world? And what if this choice, the one you think you're making now, was just another ripple? In a sleep that calls itself consciousness, you trip on the stairs. If it sits you, you say, these steps are uneven. If it's someone else, you say, they're clumsy. This is the actor-observer bias, a psychological paradox where we explain our own behavior by context, but explain others' said behavior by character. And buried inside this bias is a terrifying mirror. You don't even understand your own choices. You just explain them differently, depending on who you think you are. When you act, you see circumstance. When you watch, you see personality. But what happens when you become both the actor and the observer? You see yourself do something impulsive. You reflect on it. You explain it. I was tired. I was stressed. I had to. You don't say, I am irrational. You say I was pushed. But someone else, doing the exact same thing. You judge them. You say, they're weak, they lack discipline. And you never notice the asymmetry. Now widen the lens. Apply this to every decision you've made. The one you regret. The one you justify. The one you defend to others but secretly question inside. The actor in you always has a reason. The observer in you always wants to make sense of it. But neither one sees clearly. Here's why both actor and observer are built from post hoc storytelling. Your internal narrator edits every scene after the fact, revising motives, rewriting intentions, smoothing over contradictions, and the split between actor and observer becomes a loop. I act, I explain, I become the person I said I was, then I act again. But at no point does freedom enter the loop, only rationalization. You say I chose to leave that job. But was it choice? Or accumulated tension, quiet fear, whispered suggestion, a message seen 2 weeks earlier, forgotten but still working? You say I finally confronted him. But was that will, or the emotional overflow of years erupting on schedule? And when others do the same, you assume they meant to. You forget they're trapped in their own loops, just like you. This split doesn't just distort how you see others. It distorts how you see yourself. Because every action you take becomes part of your self-image, and you must protect that image. So when you act badly, you explain it. When you act well, you take credit. When you're confused, you retroactively assign purpose. And all the while you call it free will. But if your understanding of your own motives is biased, if your explanations are self-serving, if your moral compass adjusts to preserve your narrative, then what part of you is ever in charge? The actor performs. The observer applauds. And the audience, your sense of self, believes the story was real. But what if the play was improvised? What if no one wrote the script? What if the character is just responding to stage cues, lighting shifts, background noise, and still says this was my decision? But it wasn't set. It was the actor. It was the observer. And it was neither. Because free will was never in the audience. You are the thinker of thoughts, the decider of actions, the doer behind the doing. Or so you believe. But what happens when the doer disappears? This is the final paradox. The end of the doer, the moment when the sense of being the one who acts begins to collapse, not because action stops, but because the illusion of authorship no longer survives inspection. Try this. Notice the next thought that arises in your mind. Where did it come from? Did you summon it? Or did it appear, like a bird flying across the sky, uninvited? Now try to control your thoughts. Wait longer. Try not to think anything. And yet, they still come. They arise like waves. You can't stop them. You can't predict them. You can't replace them with silence for more than a few seconds. The thoughts think themselves. Now look at your body. Are you beating your heart? Are you digesting your lunch? Are you choosing to blink? Of course not. It's all happening. You're watching, feeling, experiencing, but not doing. Even your breath, the symbol of willpower in meditation, is autonomous. Try to stop it. You'll black out, and the body will take over again. Life continues, with or without your approval. So what is you? Is it the bundle of thoughts you didn't choose? The body you didn't build? The memories you didn't design? The preferences you didn't construct? What remains when you strip away all the parts you didn't control? Not the thinker. Not the chooser. Not the doer. Just the awareness. And even the awareness is not doing anything. It's receiving, observing, holding the movie of life on its silent screen, but it is not choosing the scenes. This is the final fracture in the story of free will. You don't still do. You are done. The actions happen. The words form. The feet walk. The voice speaks. The hands type. The decisions unfold. But the sense of being the one behind them, the director in the shadows, was a hallucination. The doer was a ghost story told by the mind to itself. So what now? Do you disappear? No. You remain, not as the actor, not as the puppet, not as the decider, but as the field in which these things arise. A breeze moves the trees. The river flows. The clouds shift. But no cloud commands itself. No river steers. And no self wills. There is doing, but no doer. There is thinking, but no thinker. There is life, but no controller of life. And if that frightens you, look again. It also frees you. Because if there is no self to carry, no will to uphold, no author to protect, then the burden drops. And what frets left is just this: stillness, presence, uncaused, undone, complete. Yusfev, come this far. 30 doors opened, 30 illusions examined, each one promised something solid, a foundation, a foothold, a last place where freedom might still live. But with each step something quiet began to fade. Not just belief in free will, but belief in the one who believes. You didn't lose free will. You lost the one who wanted to find it. The journey began with certainty. I am the chooser. Now at the end that voice feels distant, like a character in a dream, like a puppet looking up and asking, who moved me? And finding no answer. Let's rewind, not to the start of the video, but to the start of the thought that you are thinking, that you are the origin of effort, the source of choice, the doer. It was never proven, just assumed. An inheritance, passed down in stories reinforced by society, rewarded in school, punished in law, mythologized in religion. Be good. Be accountable. Be better. Be someone. But what if there's no one to be? What if everything you've ever done was done by everything that came before you? The air that shaped your lungs. The foods that shaped your cells. The fears that shaped your habits. The hands that shaped your heart. The sentences that shaped your thoughts. And yet, you still say, I choose. Why? Because it feels that way. Because the machine narrates its movements. Because the system doesn't reveal its seams. Because the actor doesn't see the stagehands moving the lights. Even now, especially now, you may feel an urge to resist this. To say, no, this isn't set right. I decide my own path. I choose what I believe. But ask, where did that resistance come from? From past teachings? From pride? From a deep discomfort with surrender? Did you choose to feel resistance? Or did resistance arise like everything else? Maybe even this thought, this moment, is just another scene in a play that was written long ago, and your role was to question the script. And to believe the questioning made you free. But here sits the twist of the loop. Even if free will is an illusion, even if the doer is a ghost, even if the chooser was never real, you are still here. Not as the author, not as the owner, not as the pilot, but as the field, the witness, the breath. And what if that is enough? What if peace isn't found in control, but in the absence of needing to control? What if letting go of authorship is the most honest thing you can do? Because no matter how many times you look, you will not find the beginning of you. The thought will arise, the hand will move, the story will continue, and the illusion will return, as it must. You will forget. You will say, I choose again. You will live in the dream of control. But now, a deeper part of you knows. There is no thinker. There is no doer. There is no will to be free. There is just this, a moment arising. No owner. No origin. Only awareness, noticing it unfold. Again, and again, and again.